Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our special edition end-of-year webinar. My name is Casey Renner, and I'm the Community Manager here at OpenView. For those of you who might not know, though I hope you all do, OpenView is a venture capital firm based in Boston that focuses on expansion stage software companies and helping them acquire, retain, and grow the right customers and talent. And you can, of course, find out more at openviewpartners.com. So we know here at OpenView that every year presents new technology and future possibilities that tend to initially be hard to comprehend for organizations as they're going into planning for the next year. So to help you and your team with planning for these changes, we're bringing together leaders of our expansion team to discuss the top trends, tactics, and concepts that you should be thinking about going into 2017. So joining us today, we have Devin McDonald, who is a partner on the expansion team and heads that up. John McCullough, who is VP of Corp Depth. Kyle Lacey, who is VP of Marketing. Liz Kane, who is VP of Go-to-Market, and then Kyle Poyar, who is one of our market strategists here. So before I turn the floor over to Devin to kick it off, a few housekeeping items for you. There will be time for Q&A at the end, so as questions come up, please use the chat feature on the bottom left side of your screen, and we'll certainly try to get to as many as possible. And I will be sending out the deck and recording at the end of this, so please keep an eye out for that. And sort of all that being said, Devin, I'll turn it over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Casey. And thank you for everyone for joining this afternoon. Just quickly, a brief overview of OpenView. We are a venture capital firm. We invest exclusively in B2B software companies. And on this slide that you see here, you'll see our portfolio. We have 26 active portfolio companies across the U.S. and quite frankly across the globe. Our most recent investment, Logs, is actually based in Israel. So purely expansion stage software. Expansion stage to us is the company has really established product market fit and is probably generating somewhere over $1 million in annual recurring revenue. So OpenView is quite unique. At our core, we are a venture capital firm, but we have this unique offering called the Expansion Platform. And the Expansion Platform is a combination of the four key elements that you see on this slide, on slide 4. That includes an ecosystem of top enterprise software executives and top CIOs or innovation leaders that ultimately become buyers of our portfolio company's technology. We run a series of events over the course of the year that are geared towards helping leaders within expansion stage software companies scale. Those could range anywhere from marketing forums to business development workshops to CEO forums to even online events like you're attending today. We have a really strong content engine. We're creating content every single day in the form of articles, ebooks, webinars, guides, you name it, that are all geared towards our specific audience. And last but not least, we have a team of full-time employees at OpenView that work exclusively with our investments to help them scale. And on slide 5, you'll see our lovely faces. This group here is really kind of centered around helping our portfolio companies acquire and retain more of the best talent and acquire and retain more of the best customers. And it's no coincidence that we chose those areas to focus on in terms of adding experts in the field. Those are ultimately the areas where we see our portfolio companies and expansion stage software companies struggling with the most and most focused on at this point in their growth. So we've shaped a team around supporting our companies through those challenges as they're scaling so rapidly. So with that, I would like to tee up the next part of this conversation to Liz Kane, our VP of Go-to-Market, and Kyle Poyar, who is a market strategist, to talk about go-to-market trends going into 2017.
Thanks, Devin. We're going to start out with monetization. So right now in the market, as SaaS executives know, venture capital is no longer an unlimited commodity. The startups are under even more pressure to prove that they have a sustainable revenue model. Companies are also realizing that an improvement in their pricing leads to far and away more profit improvement than any other initiative. And Warren Buffett has shared his secret to his investment strategy, which is look at pricing power. He says pricing is the single most important decision in evaluating a business. And if you've got the power to raise prices by 10%, you've got a great business. if you have to have a prayer session before doing that, then you probably don't have such a great business. And so more and more CEOs and the C-suite is trying to think about pricing and understand whether they have optimized it and use that as a real strategic growth lever. OpenView recently released a survey of over 800 different SaaS companies where we asked different questions to test the pricing maturity of companies, and we found that at more than 70% of SaaS companies, CEO or company leadership owns pricing, and that was pretty consistent across seed stage, expansion stage, growth stage, and IPO or exit stage companies. But even though there is more and more C-level visibility, there's not the research and testing that's done on pricing that there is that's done on conversion rate optimization, different types of sales strategies, different types of go-to-market or marketing activities. And so more and more for 2017, we expect to see C-levels are, instead of just having the final decision on pricing, they're going to make sure that they encourage their teams to do more testing and optimization around it to realize this untapped growth opportunity. Another related opportunity is we're seeing that product qualified leads are the solution to a failing freemium model. And so with freemium, we found that in a Pacific Crest study that was released this year, 75% of SaaS companies actually said that they generated no net new ACV from freemium, and only 9% of SaaS companies said they generated more than 25% of their net new ACV from freemium. So while a couple years ago freemium was one of the top trends in SaaS, more and more companies are seeing freemium as just another lead generation activity in the marketing toolkit rather than the core behind how they're building their business. And they're trying to pivot from this freemium model, which attracted a whole bunch of users that were never going to convert into a paid customer, and they're trying to pivot into a product-qualified lead model where they combine the velocity of self-service and a free product with the higher ACVs and deal sizes associated with having an inside sales team. And so they offer really targeted either self-service products at an attractive price point that can be put on a credit card, with very easy to get started, or limited free products, and then identify those most likely to convert based on their product usage and push their customer success teams, their sales teams into converting those really attractive customers into enterprise deals for the business. And some additional evidence to share here. We took a quick look at Google Trends and the interest in freemium over time, and you can see that what was at 100 in January 2015 is down to just 25% of its January 2015 peak. And so clearly the interest in freemium is on the decline, and companies need new ways to make up for that.
Awesome. So as we pivot more towards the sales side, I want to talk a little bit about leading indicators. So whether you're leading a team of SDRs, account executives, or maybe account managers or customer success, tracking results and output is no longer enough. We want people to be looking at leading indicators and determining what metrics are early indicators of success or issues, and tracking them continuously to make adjustments and iterations on the plan. So this year I've spent a lot of time with sales ops leaders and have consistently heard the same concerns around the amount of time it takes to develop and track new metrics. So often, when a new leader joins an organization, the first thing they do is make major changes to process or metrics, and they're often brought in to do that. But designing a whole new list of reports is really time consuming. So before we dive in, I like to ask two key questions. One, what decision will be made based on this data? And then the second, if you have the data today, how would it impact your actions? And if you can't answer these questions, it's likely not worth your time. So I'm going to highlight a couple of examples of good leading indicators that I've looked at. So let's start with SDRs. Often we're paying compensation based on output, and we want to align to the revenue number, but there's really good leading indicators around activity. So if you know how many calls and emails it takes for you to get a meeting, and you can predict the number of meetings you'll have in a given period, and you see that activity volume is low early on, you can start to course correct that. So maybe you run a spiff and encourage that increased output before the end of the month or quarter to help drive the actual number of meetings you need. Similarly, if you're in a customer success role, you might want to track the time or depth of product adoption. So if you're early, the first few weeks of deployment, and you see that only 30% of the licenses purchased have been deployed, but you know that license rollout is a primary driver of renewal, you can start to proactively address that with your client, see if you can apply additional resources or if you can determine a problem before it really spins out of control. So my advice going into 2017 is to really hone in on the few key pieces of information that you can use to predict outcomes and help impact change, either through recognizing success early and doubling down, or by identifying problem areas and issues and course correcting. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Kyle Lacey, our VP of Marketing.
Thanks, Liz. So when we were looking at marketing trends, I really have two that I'm going to focus on with you guys, and it's kind of bringing in every trend that I could find that people were talking about and grouping them into two ideas. And the first one is based off of data. And as Liz talked about, and even as Kyle talked about, and actually through all points of growth for a software company, data is extremely important. And one of my favorite quotes is, "We must use data to create better actions." And I don't think we do that very well as marketers, and I'm speaking directly to the marketers, but it's really about creating the best processes around how you're managing the data and making sure that the data inputs are important. Because one of the major trends that are going to influence a lot of what we do in the next year, if not beyond, is artificial intelligence. And you're starting to see more of the bots, the chat bots come out, and companies like X.AI that are booking meetings using artificial intelligence. As more systems come out that are artificially based, the data is going to be extremely important for them to work. And I'm pretty sure it was Gartner that said that 70% of CRM implementations fail basically because data inputs were wrong and they weren't clean. And I think it's extremely important that while we see a massive increase in funding in artificial intelligence, it's great, and I'm not saying that Terminator is going to come back and kill us all, but I think these are all going to be good things. It's really important that marketers and anyone in software is really focusing on the processes around how you manage data in your company. Because if you're not doing it the right way, and somebody's on Google Sheets, and somebody's using Salesforce, and somebody's in Excel, and nobody has any idea what is going on, it's artificial intelligence or any type of technology that you implement is going to break and is going to fail, and you're not going to get the best out of that system that you can, because a database with no data has no value. It's vital to the success of marketing in the future as it becomes more tech-oriented that you are focused on the database, and it's vital to your growth overall. The second trend is content will become user-led. Kyle talked a little bit about product-led growth, product-qualified leads. It's very much the idea that it's really a more capital-efficient way to engage prospects. And you look at companies like Slack and Atlassian and Trello and one of our portfolio companies, Expensify, they have this product-led growth model, and I think the same type of rules apply to content. I think content in general is becoming, there's so much of it in the market that it's becoming really hard to differentiate yourself, especially when you try to gate everything in order to hit a lead volume. And I think what we're going to find moving into 2017 is that the quality, and we talk a lot about quality is king and blah, 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 blah. I think this year you're going to really find that quality is going to set, the quality content is going to set itself apart. And I really believe that content should be user-led, not brand-led. So I want to give you a couple steps to what I define as user-led content. You must be perceived as unique. The content must be perceived as unique. Listicles and the top 10 ways to get great marketing or tips to whatever is not unique. It needs to be value-based. It needs to be experience-based on what you want the prospects to experience, what you want your customers to experience regarding your brand. It must provide advice that can be applied to their daily routine. It must be helpful. Your content is regularly available without barriers. I think there are ways that you can create content and put CTAs within that content without gating the whole piece of content. I think content should be used to provide value that helps build a brand, and then when somebody feels like you are providing the ultimate value, they say, it's okay for you to contact me, you should contact me. Ensure your blog titles accurately represent the content of your articles. Get away from clickbait. Just go look at what BuzzFeed says and don't use any of their titles. CTAs are embedded through the content and are triggered after the reader has experienced real value. So a really easy way to do that would be to have a CTA-like system like OptinMonster pop up or come inline text when somebody has read halfway through a post. Or you're making sure that you're delivering some type of ad depending on somebody reading an entire article. I think that gating content is old school, frankly, and I think that 2017 will see more content be user-based instead of what the brand thinks the user wants. And top-of-the-funnel content is really important to growth. I think data is really important to growth. But one of the most important things, in my opinion, and I think that what we've seen with our portfolio companies at OpenView is Corp Depth. And that's what I'm going to hand it off to John to talk about what he's seen as Corp Depth trends for next year.
Great. Thanks a lot, Kyle. Yeah, we spent a lot of time working with the portfolio at OpenView to really help them position themselves for optimal strategic outcomes, whether that be going public or being acquired at a premium and finding a new home, or even potentially staying private. And I've observed some key trends over the last year or so, and I think a lot of them will persist going into next year in terms of the M&A landscape in tech and software in particular. One is, you might be seeing some of the big strategic software companies like Oracle and Adobe and others, Microsoft obviously as well, have been doing a lot of acquisitions, very, very big deals. There's record cash and a lot of appetite at what we call these big strategic buyers, and we expect that to continue. There's over $1 billion in cash at the largest 200 tech companies, and that's grown substantially over the last 10 years or so. That cash, combined with the fact that a lot of the legacy platforms are not really growing organically at this point, and it's very tough for these vendors to keep up with startups and innovative solutions that have a lower cost of ownership. So they need to acquire their way into growth. And if you, for comparison's sake, if you look at sort of the big, 5 to 7 platforms, Cisco, Google, IBM, Apple, Microsoft, Oracle, they have about $100 billion in net cash on their balance sheets right now. By comparison, if you took every single public software company that's under a market cap of about $5 billion, that's about 70 companies, their total market cap together is about $100 billion. So you could conceivably see all of those companies go away. That's not actually going to happen, but that's how much cash is sitting at these companies, and I think a lot of M&A will continue next year. Next to them, PE buyers, private equity, have been stepping up to the plate, often outbidding their strategic counterparts, which historically hasn't happened. There's over $400 billion in dry powder cash in tech-focused PE firms. They're getting aggressive. Funds are cheap. Interest rates are low. They can use a lot of debt, and they're aiming a lot of that at software, and I think that'll continue both in terms of price and number of deals next year. Also, the traditional thought that grow at all costs gets you the best value, not really true anymore. It's a combination of growth and profitability, and that shift has, growth is still more rewarded than profitability, but the shift has moved more towards a combination of the two. So we talk about the rule of 40. If the combination of your growth rate and your operating margin is somewhere around 40%, you're in a really good spot. If you're skewed way in one direction or the other, if you're growing 20% and you're burning a ton of cash, you should probably think about course correcting either from a growth standpoint or a profitability standpoint. So think about more than just growth. Another trend we're seeing is non-tech companies are here to play. You're seeing a lot of tech deals, software deals getting done by folks, Ford, GM, Walmart, Verizon, Under Armour, others who really, this is the whole software is eating the world concept, and non-tech companies are digitizing, and they're doing it through M&A. Through Q3 of this year, those types of companies spent more than half on VC-backed M&A than traditional tech companies did. So play nice with those companies. I've had conversations with folks like Staples, Home Depot, Caterpillar, Lowe's about partnerships with companies in our portfolio as they're trying to digitize. And then lastly, life might be better private. It's really expensive to go public and stay public. It costs companies somewhere to $2 to $5 million a year, I've seen. And it's a different lifestyle living quarter to quarter, catering to the public market. So it might not be that bad being acquired by a private equity firm at a great price, or being acquired by a big strategic and getting to run your business and stay there post-deal. And what are the things that you can do? Well, they're the same things I said a year ago. Raise awareness proactively. Don't necessarily wait for folks to come to you to create an outcome. Get your Corp Dev deck together, your corporate guide. I've created a guide, and I'm happy to send it out to folks on how to make this deck to tell your story, even if you're only spending a couple hours a quarter, and make Corp Dev part of your workflow. Yes, your heads down, focused on your business, but get out there and talk to folks. Go build relationships with the big strategics and the PE buyers, sort of digging that well before you're thirsty, so that you can sort of create your own serendipity, so to speak. Leverage investment banks and your VCs. Investment banks, they're there to help you execute deals, but before that part, they'll do a lot of work for free, frankly. Get buyer and market intel from them. You can get feedback on your pitch. You can find introductions to potential buyers, and build relationships with those folks that may be able to help you in a transaction should one come along. Do the same thing with your venture backers. Use them for introductions and advice. And lastly, the way into a lot of these places is to think about a partnership. A lot of the discussions that I broker between our portfolio and larger software companies are around go-to-market partnerships. You call it dating before you marry, but it's a great chance to prove out the value prop before some sort of acquisition might happen. And if a partnership doesn't happen, then, well, you've opened a door and you've created a relationship. So a lot of the groups in these big tech companies that handle M&A also handle partnerships. There's a reason for that. It's a similar type of sort of step function growth, and you can sort of get in the door that way. Think about it that way. So that's what I'm seeing. I'll hand it back now to Devin McDonald to wrap up for Q&A.
Excellent. Thank you, John. And before we do jump to Q&A, I would like to comment on one particular topic that has been a major focal point, not only for OpenView in 2016, but also more broadly speaking in the industry, both in software and venture capital. And it most certainly will become a topic that continues to be front and center in 2017 based on trends we're seeing. But that's really around women and technology and this concept of what can be done to sort of bridge the gap. I think we've seen, really since 2012 when Lean In came out, just this increased level of conversation around the topic and things that could be done to increase women's participation in fields and industries that have really been male-centric over the last few decades. So OpenView, very conscious of this, given that the companies that we're evaluating and the industry that we're living in, venture capital, is very male-dominated. What we did was we partnered with NCWIT, which is the National Women Center in Technology, an organization that's really sort of geared towards bringing awareness of women and trying to help women have more of a voice and more of a role in computing in particular. We made a public statement that we put out during the summertime around goals that we were going to hold ourselves to over the next couple of years, and not only hold ourselves to them, but make them public, which would just create that sense of extra accountability. And those goals were, what we wanted to do was have 25% of all on-site interviews for technical roles for which we are directly sourcing as our expansion team, from a recruiting standpoint, be women. We wanted females to comprise 33% of all on-site interviews for sales roles. We know that sales and sort of the technical roles historically have been more sort of male-dominated in the enterprise software space. And then 50% of all potential board seat introductions made by OpenView, we're striving to have be female. So we are going to release a report that sort of outlines where we stand against those goals 6 months in. What I will say is we are falling slightly behind. We're definitely putting effort around making those numbers happen, but we do need to continue to put more and more effort against that next year. But we are going to stand by those numbers and report on them, like I said, in the next week. We're still sort of waiting for some searches that we're currently working on to close out over the next, before the end of the year. But what I can say is that 19% of all potential board seat introductions that OpenView has made since we made this commitment have been female. So, we are making introductions, but we need to get better, and we're going to be very conscious of that next year. And so going into 2017, we're not the only ones that are coming forward with these very public statements about where we want to be and the goals that we're setting forward and actually reporting on those. I would say that's a huge trend for this year. I mean, you see Pinterest doing it, Twitter. There's a number of organizations that are encouraging their portfolio companies to do just that as well. So that's a big trend. I think it's not just talking about it. We've been talking about women in technology and this sort of gender gap for the last few years. I'm seeing far more action, and it's coming from people actually setting quantitative goals and reporting on them. It just creates that extra accountability, and I think we're really kind of we're making more progress by setting those types of goals. So with that, I would like to open the floor for a Q&A session. If anyone who's listening, attending the webinar today has any questions for anyone that you've heard from, now's the time.
Yeah, so we do have one that came in. So all the presenters, thank you so much. I've got a lot of feedback from the audience that this has been a great presentation for them. First question kind of could go across the board, and then the second half, John, might be geared a little more towards you. But can you talk about companies that have a remote workforce, examples Basecamp, Automatic, et cetera? Is this something you see increasingly, and what are your M&A thoughts about this?
So this is John, and Devin or Kyle or Liz, jump in if you want on this first part, because what comes to mind to me is, as we have a lot of young companies visit the offices here. Working with our investment team, we're constantly looking at them, constantly meeting folks. My sense is we've seen more companies trying to make the remote workforce model work, and the huge benefit that I've noticed is from a recruitment standpoint, you kind of can pluck folks out of anywhere rather than having to stick to one or two cities. There seems to be a lot of leverage there. I can't speak to that as well as Liz can, but that seems to be something that a few founders have been very passionate about coming in. And then I'll just take the second part really quickly. From an M&A standpoint, I think that I will say that I don't see that necessarily deterring anyone from acquiring a business. I mean, if somebody is making it work and that's the model that works, you're not going to lose points for it because it's doing something for you. So I haven't heard any of that from any of the big companies out there. From a post-close integration standpoint, will they force you into an office? Depends on the company, but I think that the big businesses are kind of putting their toe in the water with this whole concept and getting more comfortable with it. So again, if you're a business with a lot of value, a lot of great IP, and a good model, they'd be hard-pressed to change too much. So I wouldn't think of it as a deterrent.
Great, thanks, John. And we did actually earlier this year do a webinar around engaging your remote workforce. So if anybody is interested in getting a copy of that, happy to send that along.
And I will say, this is Devin speaking, I will say actually in the last 6 months, we've seen a number of companies that we're considering making an investment in have a remote workforce, and that be a huge part of their business's culture. As John had noted, I think that there are a lot of advantages to it. It opens up the pool of candidates that you can potentially bring onto your team that are incredibly high quality. But it does come with a set of challenges, and particularly as you scale, we do see it being more challenging to sort of really build that sense of culture. There are tools out there that I think are making it a lot easier, and I think we will continue to see tools that make that type of remote engagement easier, but you still always kind of have that human element, day-to-day sort of human interaction piece missing. So it'll be interesting to see how that shapes up, and if we continue to see more and more companies with that type of team model.
Kyle Poyar, you talked about product-led growth. What do you think, sort of in your opinion, makes a company successful at product-led growth?
Yeah, so product-led growth is one of the biggest trends we're seeing with companies coming in, especially for our investment team. And I think a couple of the reasons why is that they tend to be pretty capital efficient in terms of acquiring new users, and then there's a lot of built-in expansion opportunity once they have a customer. That customer tells their friends, they tell other people in the organization, and so there's a ton of growth potential and net negative churn. I think the signals that a company is able to adopt a product-led growth strategy is the product tends to be really quick to value, so customers see value without too much training and onboarding required, and they get value pretty quickly, and then the paywall follows the value and the usage. There also tends to be some sort of virality to the product. People love to use it, want to share it. In a lot of the markets, the legacy product is really complex and clunky, and people hate it. And so the fact that they have a new solution just makes all the difference in the world to their experience. One company in our portfolio that exemplifies that is Expensify, which is a mobile-first expense management platform, and their tagline is expense reports that don't suck, because everyone's experienced expense reports that do suck. They've made a really easy-to-use product that especially power users who are filling out expense reports constantly love, and then that bubbles up into enterprise deals and standardizing it across an entire company on the platform. A couple of other characteristics that tend to make that strategy work are that there tends to be a pretty large market of potential users. With Expensify, you can imagine there's millions and millions of people that could benefit from it, and so that tends to be pretty common. Other companies that also really exemplify this product-led growth approach are JoinMe, Atlassian, Slack, Uber Conference, Typeform, GitHub. So you can imagine that most of these companies tend to have a very large market of potential users, and so we can really leverage that virality and network effects in the product. The last thing that I would say is the user tends to play the role of being a buyer, or the buyer can be a user. It might not be the only buyer persona, but it's certainly one of them. If you tend to have to go through procurement and there's a really complicated process of getting a product adopted, it's a little bit harder to pursue a product-led growth strategy. Still possible, but those additional steps make it harder for that to be truly successful.
Great. Next question, Liz, I have is for you. There have been huge advancements in the sales tech stack. That is actually another topic we did a webinar on, so I might just send out all of the webinar recording links for all of you so you have them. But with the push for automation in the last year, sort of how do you think that will change in 2017 in terms of the sales tech stack?
Yeah, it's definitely something we've been spending a lot of time on. I mean, I think some of the tools that are out there now to automate different parts of the sales process and some of the outreach efforts are awesome if they're used well. But I think often they're deployed without a lot of direction to the end user, and you end up creating a bit of a spamming mentality. I've seen sales teams rely too heavily on automation to do the job of salespeople rather than really augmenting the highly specialized skill sets of the team. So in 2017, I think kind of two major trends are coming our way. One, I think that tech needs to become more predictive or suggestive. So instead of just automating, it'll need to respond and suggest the next best action for sales, not just an action. And then second, I think sales teams will probably start to take a step back and focus on core skills. So if they can leverage tools like SalesLoft or Outreach to allow us to do more in a day, but actually use that to free up their time to ensure that they're providing that same highly customized, very specialized and personalized creative touches on the leads that are core to their target market. I think there's a huge opportunity there for automation to continue to play a bigger role, especially by freeing up the time of sales reps to work on the highest productive things.
Great, thank you. And we'll just put in one more, and if there's any else, other ones that you have kind of floating around, let me know now before we wrap up. Devin, what would you say OpenView is seeing in terms of trends for new companies or a focus on investment kind of moving into 2017?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we've talked about it a lot today, and so it shouldn't be a major surprise, but definitely AI is something that we're hearing all the time. In some cases, it's a buzzword that people use, but there are some companies that are truly building, AI-centric, very sophisticated technologies, and we're very excited about those. We actually, one of our more recent investments was a company based in Boston, actually, called Cogito, and that is one that is really kind of AI for call center reps to help them on the phone have more engaging and positive outcome conversations with customers. So really excited about that space, and I'm sure that will only, as Kyle Lacey mentioned, continue to increase in the coming year. Security, with all the online threats out there, there are many security companies that are rising. Actually, Israel is a hot spot for security companies. So we are spending a lot of time evaluating the best of the best in that space, but we're continuing to see new technologies in that space. It feels like almost weekly. And I would say also API-driven technologies are particularly interesting, and one from an investment standpoint we see as being highly scalable businesses. So that's, I would say, some areas that we're really excited about.
And I would say security makes sense given the push to AI. That's
exactly.
as things move to that. So great. Well, thank you, all of our panelists. Thank you so much for this. As I said earlier, a lot of input, that this was a really great presentation for people on the call. So to all of you on the line who joined us today, thank you so much for taking the time out of what I'm sure is a busy week getting ready for the holiday season here. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I will send out the recording to this presentation and the deck. In addition, I will also send out the links for the remote work webinar, the how to build a Corp Dev deck, and Kyle Poyar had mentioned the pricing calculator, so I'll also send a link out to that. If you're interested, also on our lab site, labs.openviewpartners.com, we do have a handful of articles that talk about some other trends for 2017, so please feel free to go check that out. And we're finalizing our webinar schedule for 2017, so keep an eye out for what's to come next year, and I hope all of you have a very safe and happy holiday season. And just some jingle bells to close you out, so get you in the spirit. So thank you all again, and look forward to having you again soon.